June 12, 1944. The rain had been falling over the Norman hedgerows since dawn, turning the dirt tracks into thick, clinging sludge that swallowed boots and rattled nerves. For the German grenadiers of the 352nd Infantry Division, the storm was a blessing at first. Mud slowed the enemy. Mud punished the mechanized. Mud was the great equalizer, and German officers had repeated the same reassuring line for years. American machines were soft. American drivers lacked discipline. Their equipment was made for highways, not battlefields. In this weather, every German soldier believed the same thing. Nothing on wheels would get through. Lieutenant Karl Brenner had repeated those words himself only the previous night as he gathered his platoon behind a fallen stone farmhouse. The men were exhausted, hollowed by 2 weeks of fighting, but confident that the rugged Norman backroads would stall the Americans long enough for reinforcements to arrive. The Panzer Division positioned farther east was already struggling to keep half its vehicles operational. Soviet mud had taught the Wehrmacht that nature had no respect for engineering brilliance, and France now delivered the same lesson. If the Germans were suffering, Brenner reasoned, then the Americans must surely be drowning. But by mid-morning, that confidence began to crack. The first sign came not from the enemy, but from the panzers themselves. A Panzer IV attempting to reposition along a forest track had sunk too deeply into the mire. Its tracks churned helplessly as the engine whined under strain. 2 more attempts only buried the machine further until the driver finally killed the motor in frustration. The crew climbed out, boots sinking into the muck, shoulders slumped in resignation. Everyone understood what that meant. The tank was immobilized unless a half-track could reach it, and the half-tracks were already bogged down on another road to the north. Brenner watched the scene with a tightening jaw. The Americans would advance soon, and the Germans had nothing mobile to counter them. All he could do was prepare an ambush and hope the enemy's own vehicles were faring worse. By noon, distant engines rumbled from beyond the hedgerows. Brenner raised his binoculars. His platoon crouched low, whispering doubts to one another. The engines didn't sound strained. They didn't sputter or stall like the armored vehicles around them. Instead, they hummed with a strange, steady confidence. Brenner frowned. That was not the sound of half-tracks or Shermans. What emerged from the tree line stunned the Germans into silence. Small, boxy silhouettes rolled effortlessly out of the forest, bouncing lightly over roots and puddles. They slipped between trees like water, gliding past exposed roots the way a horse might skip over a stone. Brenner's breath caught as he recognized them. Jeeps, American Jeeps, dozens of them. They moved with a quick, darting energy no German vehicle possessed. Mud sprayed from their wheels, but they never slowed. Where the Panzer IV had sunk to a halt, the Jeeps skimmed across the surface, as if the mud itself had chosen not to touch them. And in each one sat soldiers alert, rain-soaked, but calm enough to smile and talk as they drove. Some even carried supplies stacked high in the back. Crates of ammunition and rations that would have required heavy trucks in the Wehrmacht. Gefreiter Otto Weiss, crouched beside Brenner, whispered the first words any of them dared speak. How are they moving so fast? Brenner had no answer. He watched a jeep swerve around a fallen log without losing balance. Another bounced through a trench carved by the rain, its suspension flexing smoothly. The Germans had been taught that American equipment was poorly designed, that it could not withstand hardship, that any show of strength was propaganda. Yet here, in the sodden misery of the French countryside, The smallest American machine was outclassing every German vehicle on the field. As the Jeeps pushed deeper along the track, American infantry dismounted and began fanning out. They moved with the confidence of soldiers who trusted their machines. They were not overburdened, not exhausted, not slowed by the constant breakdowns that plagued the Germans. Everything they carried had been delivered with ease. A sudden burst of gunfire cracked from Brenner's right as one of his machine gun teams opened fire prematurely. The Jeeps instantly scattered, darting behind hedgerows with the speed of startled animals. Brenner cursed under his breath, ordering the rest of his men to hold their fire. But it was too late. The Americans had seen them. Within moments, American soldiers were advancing up both sides of the lane, using the Jeeps as mobile cover. One Jeep accelerated forward, skidding through the mud to deliver a squad right onto Brenner's flank. Another pulled up on a small ridge and mounted its .30 caliber machine gun. The gunner squeezed the trigger and unleashed a hail of bullets that forced the Germans to scramble into ditches. Brenner's heart pounded. He had spent most of the war respecting American artillery and their air power, but he had never feared their ground mobility. Now, watching the Jeeps weave past immobilized Panzers, he felt a creeping dread. Every German soldier had believed that the harsh terrain would humble the enemy. Instead, it was German pride that the mud swallowed first. Behind him, Feldwebel Kraus shouted in disbelief. "How are they still moving? Nothing gets through this road." Brenner knew the answer now, even if he hated to admit it. The Americans had mastered something the Germans had long ignored. They built machines not to impress, but to endure. No complicated transmissions, no fragile components, no obsession with precision engineering that collapsed under battlefield chaos. Just rugged, simple, loyal machines that took punishment and never broke. The contrast felt unbearable. A Panzer division moved like a knife, deadly, but delicate. The American Jeep moved like a swarm of hornets, everywhere at once, unpredictable, unstoppable. Where one broke down, 5 more appeared to replace it. Within an hour, Brenner's platoon was forced to withdraw through the hedgerows. As they retreated, he saw another Jeep crest a muddy rise that had halted 2 German half-tracks. The American driver laughed as the vehicle bounced down the slope, splashing mud in all directions. His passenger slapped the side of the hood as if congratulating a reliable old friend. Brenner felt a twist in his chest. This wasn't just mobility. This was a revelation. The Germans had spent years believing their machines were the finest in the world. But in this small, humbling moment, Brenner understood a terrible truth. The war would not be won by heavy armor alone. It would be won by the side whose machines could go where the soldiers needed them most. As he led his men deeper into the forest, with American Jeeps closing in from behind, Brenner realized the day had changed more than the course of a single skirmish. It had shattered an illusion that had sustained the Wehrmacht since the first days of the war. The road that should have broken the Americans had broken something far more fragile. It broke the belief that German engineering supremacy could overcome the industrial strength of a nation that built its machines for every man, every road, and every mile of the battlefield. And Brenner knew this was only the beginning. Long before German soldiers watched American Jeeps skim through terrain that left their own armored columns stranded, the philosophies behind these machines had been forged in 2 different worlds. The factories that built them were separated not only by oceans, but by cultures, priorities, and visions of war that could not have been more different. To understand why the Jeep succeeded where the Panzer struggled, one must first understand the minds that built them. In the late 1930s, German engineers were among the most respected in Europe. Precision was their craft, perfection their ambition. When the Wehrmacht demanded vehicles capable of fueling a lightning war, manufacturers responded with machines of extraordinary complexity. Karl Brenner, the young lieutenant who had watched Jeeps glide through Normandy's mud, had once toured a training depot in Brandenburg where instructors spoke of German motor vehicles with reverent pride. The engines were described like symphonies, each component tuned to perfection, each bolt and valve a testament to mechanical artistry. The Panzer was not simply a tank. It was the product of a nation that believed war would be won by brilliance, by refinement, by the superiority of design. Every gear was crafted to exact standards. Every part meant to function within strict tolerances. It was a doctrine born of confidence and, at times, arrogance. Yet, on the other side of the Atlantic, America approached the battlefield with an entirely different mindset. In Detroit, Toledo, and Willys Overland's assembly lines, engineers thought not in terms of elegance, but in terms of dirt, dust, and gasoline. Their machines did not need to impress anyone. They needed to run. They needed to keep running no matter who drove them, no matter what abuse they endured, no matter whether their operators had been mechanics in civilian life or farmers who had never handled anything more complicated than a tractor. The Jeep was designed in weeks, not years. It was tested by soldiers, not committees. When a bolt was unnecessary, it was removed. When a part failed in mud, it was replaced with something simpler. What emerged was a machine that looked unimpressive at first glance, especially to German eyes accustomed to sleek armored shapes. But beneath that humble exterior lay the beating heart of American wartime philosophy. Simplicity was strength. By 1942, German soldiers in North Africa had already witnessed the difference. Feldwebel Marcus Weber had served with the Afrika Korps and had often watched columns of American Jeeps dance through the desert sands like insects, leaving German staff cars choking in their dust. At the time, he had dismissed it as a novelty, the byproduct of a specific environment. Now, in the fog and rain of France, he remembered those days with a new clarity. The environment had changed, but the result had not. The Jeep still moved, while the German machines still faltered. The heart of the problem lay deeper than mud or sand. It lay in the very assumptions each nation brought to war. In Germany, resources were scarce. Precision engineering was seen as a way to maximize performance from limited materials. If a part could be made better, it was made better. If a machine could be improved, it was refined. Pride demanded it, and propaganda celebrated it. German soldiers were told they were the best in the world, equipped with the best in the world. But such perfection came at a price. Complex machines required complex maintenance. Panzer crews spent countless nights under open skies repairing transmissions, cleaning filters, adjusting tension. And when parts failed, replacements were often weeks away. Even the vaunted German half-tracks, the backbone of mechanized infantry, struggled when weather turned against them. Their engines flooded easily, their tracks jammed, their clutches overheated. And when a breakdown occurred, an entire unit slowed to match the speed of its weakest machine. By contrast, American supply chains were bottomless. If a Jeep broke down, it was repaired in hours. If it couldn't be repaired, it was replaced with another, fresh from a factory that produced them by the hundreds each day. Simple machines meant simple repairs, Drivers were trained in minutes, not weeks. Parts fit together with the ease of a child's toy. A field mechanic could strip down an engine blindfolded. And above all, quantity overwhelmed every obstacle. The American Army didn't rely on a handful of superb machines. It relied on millions of dependable ones. As the war progressed, the consequences of these philosophies became more visible. In the forests of the Ardennes, German armored columns faced roads washed out by rain. Tank tracks spun helplessly, while jeeps cruised past with supply crates stacked high. In the mountains of Italy, panzers shuddered on narrow passes while jeeps sprinted up rocky inclines to deliver ammunition to frontline units. Even in the streets of ruined towns, American vehicles swerved through rubble with a grace that baffled German officers. General Hans Hoth, a veteran of mechanized warfare since Poland, once remarked in a captured letter that the Americans appear to trust their machines more than we trust ours. It was a telling observation. German machines demanded obedience and expertise. American machines offered forgiveness. Anyone could drive a Jeep. Few could master a Panzer. Lieutenant Brenner learned this lesson bitterly in the days following his retreat in Normandy. As he regrouped with battered survivors of his platoon, he spoke with Obergefreiter Weiss, who still struggled to understand what they had witnessed. "It makes no sense," Weiss said, while scraping dried mud from his rifle. "How can something so small overpower machines built with such care?" Brenner stared at the puddles reflecting the gray sky. "Because they built for war," he replied quietly, "and we built for pride." Weiss frowned. Brenner clarified. "We built machines to show the world what German engineering could do. They built machines to win battles. That is the difference." For the first time in the war, Brenner felt the weight of an uncomfortable truth. The Panzer divisions that had once seemed unstoppable were not losing because their crews lacked courage. They were losing because the machines themselves, marvels though they were, had become prisoners of their own sophistication. They were too heavy, too delicate, too dependent on perfect conditions to achieve perfect performance. The Jeep had no such weaknesses. It demanded nothing from the terrain and everything from its engine, wheels, and stubborn persistence. It was a machine built for the mud, the rocks, the snow, the mountains, the deserts, the roads, and the places where no roads existed at all. By nightfall, Brenner sat alone under the trees, listening to distant engines growl through the darkness. He knew the sound now. It was the Jeep, still moving long after the Panzers had fallen silent. A small machine, unglamorous and uncelebrated, had revealed the flaw in Germany's war philosophy. Victory belonged not to the most elegant machine, but to the one that kept moving when the world around it turned hostile. And in that relentless hum of American engines, Brenner heard the future approaching. The war would be decided not by whose machines were built with the greatest brilliance, but by whose machines could carry soldiers farther, faster, and through the impossible. The Germans had built machines for war. The Americans had built machines for work. In the end, it was the workers' machines that would change everything. October 1943. The Apennine Mountains loomed like a jagged wall across the Italian skyline, their slopes carved with goat paths, broken stone trails, and roads so narrow that two men walking side by side could barely avoid brushing shoulders. Snow had begun to gather on the peaks, melting into streams that cut unpredictable channels down the ridges. For the German 114th Jaeger Division, the terrain seemed like an ally at last. No armored advance could conquer these heights. No American vehicle, they believed, could navigate a landscape that resisted even mules. But the mountain had already chosen its victor, and it was not the army with the heavier machines. Lieutenant Karl Brenner had been reassigned from France after the collapse of his platoon, now serving with a mixed detachment of infantry and reconnaissance units positioned along a narrow ridge overlooking the village of Castelvecchio. The orders were simple: deny the Americans passage through the valley. The terrain would do the rest. From Brenner's vantage point, the winding trail below looked like a trap designed by the earth itself. Sharp switchbacks carved into rock, mud pooling into slick trenches, fallen trees blocking passage at random. If the Americans attempted to bring armor, they would be exposed and helpless. If they advanced on foot, they would suffer under the fire of German machine guns dug into fortified caves. At dawn, fog rolled across the slopes, swirling like pale smoke. Brenner crouched near the overlook, scanning the valley for movement. The silence was broken only by the wind dragging cold air across the rocks. His men whispered among themselves about the difficulty of the terrain. Even German supply trucks had struggled to reach their position, and one Panzer III assigned for support had stalled half a kilometer back, stuck between two jagged boulders. "It is impossible for them," Feldwebel Kraus muttered confidently. "No vehicle can climb this trail." Brenner wanted to believe him. He wanted to trust the mountain. Yet the memory of Normandy, of jeeps darting through mud like ghosts, haunted him. Mountains were not mud, but the Americans had a habit of surprising him. By mid-morning, distant engines echoed faintly from the valley floor. Weiss leaned forward, squinting. "Shermans?" "No," Brenner answered instantly. The sound was wrong. Too light, too agile. "Jeeps." The fog thinned just enough for Brenner to see them. Small, dark silhouettes weaving through the lower trails, bouncing over rocks as though magnetically attached to the earth. One jeep leaped a fallen log, its wheels leaving the ground for a moment before settling with a smooth landing. Another splashed through a shallow stream without hesitation. Behind them marched American infantry, unburdened, their equipment carried effortlessly by the little machines. The Germans watched in disbelief. "They cannot be serious," Kraus said. "That trail is a death sentence." Yet the jeeps climbed. They climbed slopes that forced German trucks to reverse. They climbed ridges where even sure-footed mules hesitated. They climbed trails carved by shepherds, inches from sheer drops, without slowing. Drivers leaned forward, gripping the wheel. Boots braced, but the machines responded as if they were made for mountains. Halfway up the ridge, the first jeep skidded on a patch of loose stones. German soldiers held their breath. The vehicle fishtailed for a second, but the driver tapped the brakes, corrected the angle, and kept going. Brenner felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. The mountain was testing both armies, and the jeeps were passing where the Panzers had already failed. At 300 meters, the trail narrowed to a ledge barely wide enough for a wagon. The Germans had assumed this would stop any mechanized advance. Instead, the jeep slowed to a crawl and crept forward, one wheel brushing the ridge wall while the other hovered near open air. The passengers leaned inward to counterbalance the vehicle. A single misstep would send them plummeting into the shadows below. "But they made it across!" Brenner could not look away. He felt as if he were watching a miracle or a violation of natural law. The Panzer crew stranded below would have understood his disbelief. They had spent hours trying to maneuver their tank through a gap it was never designed to survive. The American Jeep, meanwhile, moved forward as if the mountain had parted to make room for it. By early afternoon, the jeeps were only a kilometer from the German defenses. Brenner ordered his men to their positions. Machine guns were trained on the upper trail, their barrels aimed at the switchback that forced all climbers to emerge in full view. The Germans waited for silhouettes to appear through the thinning fog. When the first jeep crested the bend, Brenner hesitated. The vehicle was packed with supplies, not soldiers. Spare tires, ration crates, ammunition cases. A wounded American lay in the back, his leg bandaged, his face pale. The jeep wasn't just delivering troops. It was evacuating casualties and ferrying equipment up a path German ambulances had declared suicidal. "Open fire," Krauss urged. Brenner shook his head. "Not yet. Let them come closer." He needed to understand the scale of the advance. He needed to see how many machines the Americans dared send up this impossible slope. The answer came moments later. Jeeps emerged one after another, each laden with supplies or troops. A chain of small machines climbing an unforgiving mountain, defying every expectation the Germans had. Some carried radios with long antennas bouncing in rhythm with the terrain. Others hauled mortars, medical bags, spare clothing, fuel cans. No German vehicle, not even the prized Kettenkrad, could have made this journey with such confidence. Brenner finally raised his hand. Fire. Gunfire erupted from the ridge. The first jeep swerved hard, its wheels skidding on the stones. The driver ducked. The wounded man groaned. A tire burst under the barrage, and the jeep lurched sideways. For a moment, Brenner believed they had halted the advance, but the jeep did not topple. 3 American soldiers leapt out, gripping the frame, pushing, guiding the vehicle back onto level ground. The engine sputtered, then roared back to life. They continued climbing, one tire shredded, the rim sparking against rock. The machine refused to die. The Germans gaped. Krauss muttered, "What are those things made of?" Brenner knew the answer. Not steel, not bravery, not magic. They were made of purpose. They were made for work. They were made to go where soldiers needed them, no matter what lay between. Minutes later, American troops reached a concealed position beneath the ridge. Mortar fire erupted, blasting the German defenses. Smoke billowed. Rocks shattered. Brenner's men scrambled for cover as another wave of jeeps appeared, these carrying crews who jumped out and deployed heavy machine guns. The mountain was no longer a shield. It was a battlefield, one the Americans had claimed by simply being able to reach it. By dusk, the German line broke. Brenner ordered a retreat toward a secondary ridge. As he descended the mountain, his boots slipping on wet leaves, he glanced back. A jeep had reached the very crest of the ridge he had defended. Its headlights pierced the fog like twin stars. American soldiers stood beside it, raising a radio antenna into the cold evening air. For a moment, Brenner felt the mountain watching him. The message was clear. It had chosen the army whose machines could climb it, and the war was beginning to choose the same. The winter wind clawed its way across the Hürtgen forest, rattling bare branches and sending sheets of snow tumbling from the pines. It was December 1944, and the war had entered its final, merciless act. What remained of the German army clung to the last scraps of hope, convinced that discipline, resolve, and superior engineering could still shift the tide. But in the shattered woods outside Schmidt, another truth was revealing itself, slowly and relentlessly. It rolled through the forest on 4 tired wheels, humming with the same stubborn persistence that had carried it through deserts, swamps, mountains, and mud. The Jeep kept moving. Lieutenant Karl Brenner trudged through knee-deep snow with what little remained of his platoon. Their Panzer support had vanished hours earlier, not destroyed by enemy fire, but abandoned after its transmission froze solid. Even the half-track struggled in the icy labyrinth of fallen trees and cratered ground. German soldiers stumbled forward carrying their own supplies, their breath steaming in the air, their uniforms soaked through. Every man felt the war tightening around them like a vice. Then they heard it again, the sound that had haunted them since Normandy. A steady engine, light, confident, unbothered by terrain that humbled machines 10 times its size. Weiss stopped walking. Not again. Ahead through the powdery haze, headlights flickered between the trees. A Jeep appeared on a slope so shredded by shell fire that even mules refused to cross it. Yet the little machine bounced down the incline with ease, its wheels gripping snow as if the forest had cleared a path for it. 2 American soldiers sat inside, bundled in heavy coats, speaking casually as though driving through a winter battlefield was nothing more than an inconvenience. Behind them came another Jeep, this one towing a trailer piled high with ammunition. Then a third carrying a radio operator. Then a fourth with medics, who immediately stopped beside a wounded American lying near a stump. They loaded him gently into the back and sped away toward a field station miles to the rear. The Germans stared in silence. It was not the presence of the enemy that froze them. It was the realization that the Americans had solved a problem the Germans had never been able to overcome. Their war machine never rested. It never stopped. It delivered supplies, evacuated wounded, brought reinforcements, positioned mortars, dragged cables, and carried officers across battlefields that German vehicles had long surrendered to. Brenner felt an old truth rising again, sharper now. The Jeep was not a symbol of American industrial power. It was the proof of it. All around the forest, American mobility shifted the battle like an invisible tide. Jeeps darted through ravines to deliver radio messages. Others brought hot food to forward units. Some hauled artillery shells up slopes German teams climbed only with rope and desperation. The Americans fought as an army connected by thousands of small, tireless machines linking every soldier to the full weight of their nation's industry. German troops fought as scattered islands, each one eroding bit by bit. Late that afternoon, as the sky darkened and snow hardened into ice, Brenner sought shelter inside a ruined farmhouse. Weiss followed him, stamping his boots to shake off the cold. "We were told we had the best machines in the world," Weiss said bitterly. Brenner didn't respond. "We were told the Americans had no discipline, no finesse. They built toys." Brenner still said nothing. Weiss stared through the shattered window at a Jeep climbing a slope a Panzer IV had failed to ascend 2 days earlier. An American sergeant in the passenger seat pointed toward a ridge, directing the driver with relaxed confidence. Snow sprayed behind them. "How can a nation win a war with such simple machines?" Weiss asked. Brenner turned to him, his face thin and tired. "Because they can make 10 for every one we build. Because theirs work when ours freeze. Because their machines are built for the soldier, not for the engineer." He exhaled slowly. "Because they understood something we did not." Weiss waited. "That war is not won by the most perfect machine," Brenner continued, "but by the machine that never stops moving." Outside, a German armored car attempted to push through the icy road. Its engine sputtered, choked, then died. The crew climbed out, defeated, waving to a passing squad to help push it. No one had the strength left. Farther down the road, another Jeep zipped past, its driver honking cheerfully at the German machine as if mocking it. The Americans weren't being cruel. They were simply moving forward, and forward motion had become the most dangerous weapon on the battlefield. As dusk settled, Brenner gathered his men and led them deeper into the forest. He no longer pretended they would hold the line. The winter, the supply shortages, the broken machines, and the relentless mobility of the American army were dissolving the last illusions of German superiority. Every Jeep that roared past hammered that truth deeper. Hours later, after midnight, Brenner and his exhausted soldiers were taken captive near a logging trail. They surrendered without resistance. A young American lieutenant approached them, snow resting on the brim of his helmet. He signaled for a medic to check on an older German who had collapsed moments earlier. Then the Jeep pulled up beside them, its engine humming steadily, headlights cutting through the dark. The American officer gestured to the vehicle. "Climb in," he said in accented German. "We'll take you somewhere warm." Weiss blinked. "In that thing?" "It gets us everywhere," the officer replied with a small smile. Brenner hesitated before climbing aboard. He sat stiffly in the back as the Jeep bounced along the trail, moving easily through ice and snow. Behind him, 2 American trucks struggled to keep pace, fishtailing with every turn. But the Jeep pressed on without effort, guiding the convoy like a shepherd through the night. Weiss leaned close and whispered, "This war was over, the day these machines rolled onto the battlefield." For once, Brenner did not argue. He looked at the small dashboard, the simple gauges, the worn steering wheel. The machine was ugly, loud, and crude. Yet it had done what the mighty Panzers could not. It had crossed every road, every hill, every battlefield. It had fed armies, carried wounded men to safety, and led advancing columns when tanks bogged down or broke apart. By the time they reached the American position, Brenner understood the truth with absolute clarity. This was the day the myth of German supremacy cracked. Not because the Americans outshot them or outmaneuvered them, but because they outbuilt them. They flooded the world with machines that refused to break, refused to surrender, and refused to stop. And in those simple, stubborn vehicles lay the secret of America's victory. A victory born not just from tanks and aircraft, but from the relentless power of a nation that believed the smallest machine could carry the weight of an entire army. In the end, that was America's quiet triumph. Not just overwhelming production, not just superior logistics, but the ability to show the men who once believed in German superiority that true strength came from practicality, unity, and the power of millions working together. The German soldiers were stunned by the Jeep's endurance and reach. But more importantly, they were changed by it. And in that change, the war's outcome became inevitable.